So hi, we're from Alpha Omega London, maker of shoes at heart but creator of waves in the fashion industry. We started this podcast series to tackle head-on the current issues that matter in the society we live in today and get honest views from the mouths that matter. So in this series, we're discussing how fashion over the years has frolicked with its association with revolutionary causes and social injustices, revolutionising both the industry and the way we view gender in a post-industrialised world. So tackling this discussion, this series, is Tamara,
Nazina,
Priyanka,
Kate.
So welcome back. I made it to episode 4. So today we're really going to assess how fashion over the years has affected change in respect to gender inequality and really kind of question what part fashion's played in the gender archetypes that we live by today. So who wants to...
We're looking at the role that fashion has sort of played in, obviously, in the state that we're in now with how we review gender identities. And I think fashion has over the years been incredibly pivotal, given that it is used to express, our gender identities. However, I feel as though it's been a bit of a confusing journey. I feel also that when you look at the social injustices of gender inequality, often the fashion was pretty much depicted as this sort of bastion towards equality. And I just feel it was way too idealized. You can't use fashion to change the world. Fashion just kind of hijacks that whole message, but effects very little change, in my opinion. But it keeps the conversation going because obviously
I think it raises awareness.
It definitely
it's the massive kind of facilitator of getting word out there.
Absolutely.
And it's almost like, the biggest like social media platform is what we wear.
Yeah.
I think the thing about fashion is that it's very aspirational. It kind of and by being aspirational, it also stereotypes genders. It still defines how women are supposed to look, like manicured, waxed, slim, and things like that. And when you think of clothing, it always it talks about making women look less weak and fragile. But why does it sound bizarre to us when I think about making men wear skirts?
I mean, let's kind of talk about like the power suit, yeah? Let's think, I know going back to kind of, I suppose, corporate life again, but it feels so many issues. But the power suit. So I don't know, when did it come about? Like the 80s?
That's
I guess.
right.
Started in the 80s.
I'm an 80s child. Yeah.
And it's essentially, I mean, everyone knows what the power suit is, but it's the female version of the suit. We're talking the tailored trousers, like typically back then, the big shoulders. And it definitely, it's still in our society today. I mean, I feel like a lot of women, don't mean to be mean, but choose the kind of horrible, like dowdy pencil skirt, like unfitting jacket version. But why has that been such a, I don't know, I suppose a game changer and the kind of typical woman with a big job power suit? Like, why has that come about? Why is it the suit? Why isn't it not a feminine dress, but why is it essentially dressing like a man?
Because a woman has to fit in a male-dominated environment. And, the sharp shoulders or the broad sharp shoulders almost, that they signify a sense of power. But there's an element of that needed in order to fit into that sort of male-dominated environment. Is that right or wrong? Well, I don't feel as though any woman should have to alter, their appearance in order to fit in. I don't think anyone should have to. But there have been studies that have been made which actually confirm that, it's more suggested for a woman to actually, wear a power suit, or that was pretty much what at the time was suggested, this study was, I can't actually remember which study, it would help if I did, but it supported, this whole aesthetic, particularly within that environment. It actually showed that if a woman was to adapt those sort of masculine, sort of aesthetics or features, that they're more sort of guaranteed towards success, within that environment. And I just don't know, again, I just don't know what that says. If anything, fashion, what it did at the time is it kind of piggybacked off of that and trends of broad shoulders, dominated catwalks. I'm looking at a Giorgio Armani suit, which was quite revolutionary, back in their 1989 catalogue. And, it's reflections of an era where so much was happening economically and women were sort of just entering into that very sort of powerful, corporate environment, or that they were able to at least access, even if it was limited, an element of that power that we were talking about in the previous episode. And so it's part of the rhetoric at the time. However, it's still quite damaging, because what it's saying, I guess, to young, women essentially is that you do have to alter yourself.
It's saying that, fashion's bringing across that message that to be important and to be powerful, to be taken seriously, you need to dress like a man, because men are taken seriously.
And it's reinforcing that to men as well, which is not going to help the situation.
So
exactly,
you've got this patriarchy that's just like, it's just thriving. It's not making efforts to try and do what it did, which was neutralize any inequality. It was actually perpetuating the same gender inequality concepts that we were having to deal with, and we still deal with today.
Because if you go back, obviously fashion made like a massive difference, because by adopting men's clothes, it's more about the practicalities of it. You get out the corsets, you stick on some trousers, you can now physically go to work, which you couldn't do before. But over time, it does feel like it's the practical side has been addressed. But now it's addressing the fact that we need to kind of hide you away. You can come and work here, but we need to not really be able to see you as you actually are, because we're still not quite comfortable with that. So, it's stick on some trousers. The trousers become less about enabling you to do something and sort of, it's enabling you, but it's also hindering you, because you're not, as a woman, you're not really there. No. In a way. And if you turn up in a dress to work, or you turned up in something frilly, and that's somehow seen as bad, and that I think that sort of reinforced it. And why should that be bad? You still do the same job. You still have the same ability than the day you came in trousers. Why is that so negative?
Just a quick reminder, you're listening to the AO London podcast. Please subscribe on whatever platform you listen on, give us a review, and carry on the protest. Enjoy the rest of the podcast.
The funny thing is that it almost mixed up that, aesthetic with this message of empowerment. It was seen as empowering women for the first time. And I just felt that,
it's kind of counterproductive, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it wasn't.
Because it's the idea that it's like, my gosh, women can do, you can do a man's job. You can be a man. Do that. Yeah. Dress like a man, because you can be like a man.
Yeah.
But it just added fuel to the fire, because and I think, in hindsight and, looking back, all it really did was make it okay for you to be more like a man, to be able to be powerful and to be able to do a job.
We don't necessarily want to be men.
Yeah.
That's
we
the
just
thing.
want to be treated the same
I think
as.
the industry tries to advocate social change, but in reality, I think it just exploits social movements. You know, like in the past, when you look at the hip hop culture from the 80s and the hippies culture, for example, from the 60s or something. Of course, you're emphasizing on the subculture, but you're also making them look dangerously different, which kind of starts a lot of contradictions.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it, you know, you go back further, and the idea of like when in the Victorian era, the clothing reform movement, it didn't really come out of doing that. It was always about practicality.
It was
It
organic.
was to do with
Yes.
it was to do with also women's health,
Yeah.
because you know
Yes,
previous
those
dressing
things
has
were
been
restrictive.
physically
Right.
damaging
Yeah, to the body.
as well as restrictive. It seems to me that came very much out of, and also it almost seemed like more of a sort of a government and society kind of issue being tackled.
Yeah.
Whereas now with the fashion industry, it is very much just fueling it,
Right.
basically, rather than actually addressing something that was of a genuine need.
I think it all began with wearing bloomers under short dresses or something.
And I mean, has it necessarily intended to do that? Has it kind of just been an accidental aftermath? Because essentially, like you said, with the whole, hippie era and trends like that, have they just been a way, has the industry seen it as a way to make money? They think, oh, this is a subculture people are liking right now, let's buy into it. And especially with the power suit, they're like, oh, okay, this is an era where, we're getting a lot more momentum.
Absolutely.
Inequality.
They just reinforce
Should
the
we make,
zeitgeist.
should we make a profit on this?
Yeah.
And have they really intended to make statements about, gender equality or fueling gender inequality? And has it kind
I
of
think maybe
been
mass
more
market, not so much, because their goals and their intentions is just to make a profit. But I think maybe designers with whether it's political or social agendas would have been quite proactive or active in trying to maybe tackle certain issues. But I think overall, the industry overall, I definitely don't feel we're trying to solve this issue, because clearly when you dissect, the sort of trends or the themes that were coming about during that time, they were just reinforcing the same rigid social constructs that they were trying to market.
I mean, for me, it
to
just kind of
abolish.
seems biased, because when you look at who dominates the fashion industry, and at the top end it's men.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the top end of
Absolutely.
the spectrum, designer wise and CEO wise, men run the show.
Absolutely.
And so any product of that industry is a trickle down effect.
Yeah.
They're only going to sign off and they're only okay with what, if the stakeholders are happy or if the creative director is happy. The fashion trickles down from that. And I think if essentially the people at the top are men, then what message is that going to give off, and how can we really make an impact if the change we're trying to have is to make women more equal to men,
Absolutely.
when women aren't at the top?
Absolutely.
I think by making these subcultures look more exotic, it's intentionally or unintentionally, I don't know what. I think it's creating this very clear distinction between the mainstream consumers and the population by which the industry is fascinated by.
I think it's just also it's got more prevalent. The more money that now the industry is about, the more money that gets involved with it, the more prevalent it is to just jump on a bandwagon without really thinking of, in some of these cases, really thinking about what they're doing to sell some more clothing. And it doesn't come from a place of practicality or health or really even wanting to do the right thing. It just comes down to money, I think.
I mean, as the question sort of states, has fashion affected change? Well, to be honest, no, not really, because
No, I mean, I think it's been a great, if you look back over history, it's a great gauge of where society is. It's a very visible form of showing where society is going, the changes in society. It's quite easy to chart that by just really looking at what people wear. But and there have been obviously little moments where it's made quite a difference to people's daily lives, as are we all sitting here wearing
we
trousers?
are. We are.
Yeah.
So I mean that has that, and not in corsets,
But
so it has
I'm
made a
not-
difference in that.
It's freezing outside.
Yes.
So
But we're not all sitting here wearing like corsets and a bustle. So obviously, in that respect, it has altered that. But I think really, I'd say overall those are little blips in its course.
but we're still living in a world where there is a huge amount of gender inequality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Massive.
socially, it still exists.
and I don't think that fashion is the thing that's going to.
It's not the antidote, is it? Really?
No, yeah, it might show the progress of the fight, but it's not going to be in the fight, really.
Yeah.
No. So this is great. So really, to conclude, what we're basically saying is that fashion in its very early stages, and we're talking about post-industrialized, revolution here. But during those times where women were fighting for their rights, fashion did really lend a helping hand in how a woman was then to navigate through life, making it way more obviously healthier and way more easier with the bloomers, etc., and with the sort of more functional attire. And that's a slightly different approach to the way in which fashion is I guess, tackling the social issues that evolve around gender and gender inequalities and gender identities now. I think we've entered into almost like a slightly, if you want to call it this, a smaller version of a revolution in that respect, given that, we're now looking at how men express themselves as men and how women express themselves as women, and fusing those two together. Whether I feel that fashion has over the years affected a great amount of change, particularly within the gender sort of inequality spectrum, yes it has, but then in the sort of latter years maybe not so much. And we kind of explored the whole power suit, and that it was literally an oxymoron, in that it was a representation of a woman in a man's aesthetic. So we're actually looking at an industry pretty much perpetuating the same sort of social the rigid social constructs that it was initially trying to get rid of.
Yeah, I think fashion, there's been little pockets of change during its history that it really has had an influence. But yeah, I think the longer we've gone on since those last sort of changes, and the more monetized it's become, I think there's a bit of helping and hindering from the industry.
Definitely.
It feels like, although maybe it's not affecting it, but it's charting it, social change, and it's making things visible, whether that's gender issues, cultural issues. It's bringing subcultures to the fore. It's educating. Maybe it's just educating people in a small way, getting them familiar with new ideas and helping them to understand it a bit better. But equally, it also has had massive negative effect.
I mean, funny thing is what we didn't actually discuss in more detail was unisex fashion, because I guess that was something that was quite pivotal in the 70s, and I think it unisex was definitely a way in which people were able to sort of see the homosexual community with a little bit more visibility, because I guess back then they weren't very visible. But I think after that period, we were able to understand homosexuality a little bit more. And I guess the same thing is happening with this next sort of revolution in terms of agender. We're able to understand the LGBT community who identify with agender a little bit
and
more.
That's a very positive road to go down.
And I guess homosexuals, gay people back then were able to identify with unisex fashion, and that's what we're able to understand pretty much from that, was just how much they were able to use unisex as a way of fitting in. You know, they really embraced it. For them, unisex was liberating. And I guess it's almost the same wave of change which is happening with people within the LGBT community that are able to utilize this whole agender concept. It's going to be a way in which we're going to understand them, you know, a little bit better, or they'll have more visibility, or they'll have more acceptance.
I think that's, you know, obviously that's kind of what you want from fashion, is to that positivity, making things visible, making them, you know, bringing different communities and different cultures out into the world, and you know, and bringing people together. But just you know what I mean.
Also, I think it creates awareness, doesn't it? I think the actual social movement that's happening isn't really related to fashion, but fashion's the facilitator, and it's the face of it. It's the face of the change.
But then it is going to be the face of it. It still needs to take some responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
For when, you know, in the way it deals with it, whether that's positive or negative.
Thanks so much for listening. Please let us know your thoughts and carry on the discussion on social media at @alpha_omega_London. Please subscribe on whichever platform you listen on and leave us a review to carry on the protest.